month, our theme, just like the Science of Mind magazine, is Healing is Revealing. Healing is revealing. And I wanted to start off by asking you a question. What kind of world do you think you're living in? And how big is it? Do you know? Is it as big as you would like it to be? Or is it perhaps a little smaller than you might like it to be in some way? And if so, why is that? Anybody here ever see the movie called The Truman Show? Yeah, I'm so glad there's at least a few hands up. The Truman Show is worth seeing if you haven't seen it yet. It is a fantastic metaphor for life. So Jim Carrey is the star of The Truman Show. And it is produced by this group of people that actually choose to raise this child in a sound studio on a movie set to believe that the whole world is just the one that they have constructed for him. And he grows up and he has a wonderful, perfect life, and they've kept him from every possible disillusionment and every idea of harm and whatever. And he goes sailing on this lake, which is part of the whole sound set every day. And I'm just going to blow it for you. So one day comes when go see it anyway. Rent it. One day comes when there's this great storm. One day comes when he gets too close to the edge. So they create a storm to try to keep him from discovering that he's really not where he thought he was. And the bowsprit pokes through this like paper, that is this false horizon. So he has this moment where he discovers that he's really not this guy living in this world. He's somebody who's been on this movie set that was carefully designed as his life. And he makes a decision to walk out that door and discover the rest. It is fantastic. It's a really great movie. So the reason I bring that up is because it came to mind for me last week, actually. And that's because, we go through a lot of classes and seminars together, don't we? We do stuff here, we do stuff every other day of the week. We go through these 4-week, 8-week, 10-week thingies, with a whole number of steps, and we've got systems galore for discovering the lives that we would really like to be living. And something interesting can happen sometimes. There's a voice that says, I know that. Well, that voice visited me this past week. Actually, over the last 2 weeks. It was really, excuse me, in getting ready for the conference in Orlando. And hosting, but also participating in Shortcut to a Miracle as a student, making sure I do my homework, or Reverend Elizabeth is, she makes sure that none of us are writing in class, right? Okay. So in Shortcut to a Miracle, we're identifying 4 areas where, I've got to make sure I got the right number of fingers held up, where we would like our lives to be more in some way. And we're dealing with infinity, so don't feel bad about wanting more. It's how it's supposed to be. You're either growing or you're not. You're not even living. So we're looking for what we would like to experience in the way of health, in the way of relationships, in the way of creative self-expression, and in the way of prosperity. These things have been named a few different ways, but let's just say we've been asked from the beginning of our time together in Shortcut to a Miracle to identify those things and be willing to use the tools that we're learning about over those 10 weeks to manifest some progress, some blossoming, some expansion in those areas. So my little voice says, I know that. I wrote that stuff down before. I've got my personal mission statement memorized. So I'll just skim and do the rest. Well, similarly, we're moving through another process in Prosperity Plus 2. How many of you are doing that? Okay. And what are we asked to do? We are asked to identify those same 4 areas and to be willing to imagine how we would like our lives to be better in those areas. And my little voice said, I know that. because I have done, and I have in the beginning of both of these courses, I'm talking about the last 2 weeks sort of falling off a little bit on the process of being willing to refine them, because I had begun. So when I said, well, I've got a lot going on, I have the conference to prepare for, I have this to do, I have that to do, so I'm going to do everything else but continue the process that I was involved in of refining my vision statement for both classes. I just had that voice that said, that's okay, we know that. Then I had a very interesting discovery. I discovered that the voice that says, I know that, was not my higher self. The voice that said, I know that, was not the one who is ready, willing, and on her way to expanding those areas of health and relationships and calling, vocation, creative self-expression, and comfort and ease in the material world. Again, however you choose to define, there are four. It turns out that voice was not my higher self, but it was another one that I believe you are all quite familiar with. There is this voice that is of the small e ego, and I want to define that as such. The small e ego is that perfect and necessary mechanism that we have, whose job is really to protect the biological form while we're here in this experience. But somehow it got away from its wise guiding and directing force and started assessing what is considered dangerous on its own. Now, one of the things that I was thinking is that maybe that really what happened is that if we fell asleep to our higher self, to that guiding force, to that all-knowing presence within each of us, and we forgot that it was there, then our ego was left to just do what it could with less information. Think of, for example, if you are a parent or you know a person who is a parent, when the parent has been sleeping and the child has had to handle something to the best of his or her ability while the parent was still asleep. They just did the best that they could. And what if, on the other hand, I'm mixing metaphors like crazy because it just came to me, what if the parent is feigning sleep, pretending to be asleep, so that the child will find its own way, its own readiness, its own willingness to say, gee, maybe I don't have all of the information here, and there's another way. Because there's this thing about freedom that is built into the whole experience of being here. Nothing, no matter how great, no matter how timely, no matter how purposeful, no matter how much we need it, can be force-fed. It can't be given to us until we're ready for it. That's the only time we're going to be open to it. So we have all that. So we back up and we think, okay, we've got this Truman Show idea. And we're each looking at our own lives. And I was looking at mine saying, is this really as big as I would like it to be? Let me see. In the area of health, not quite. Okay. What about harmonious relationships? Yes. And there's always something more that could be added there as well. Okay. What about creative self-expression? Well, I have a few things that have been on the back burner for a long time. And I recognize that I am here to do them. I want to do them. I see people who are doing them, and they inspire me. Am I doing those? Well, not yet. And how about ease in the material world? Well, I'll tell you, we had our friends come visit, and they were eyewitnesses to the fact that our guest room is actually a storage area and music room, and we decided to disassemble the bed and lean it up against the wall so that we could have room for bicycles and vibes and all kinds of things that go jingle jangle and whatever, music stands. There's no room for anyone to stay over. Well, it's really wonderful to be so crafty at accommodating the space that you believe you live in, right? It's so wonderful to be so good at making use of what you've got. There's nothing wrong with that. But do you have to? Do we have to? Is it possible that we could just imagine another room? They make houses with more room in it. No. Well, I might have to imagine more dollars in order to have more rooms. You know? Oh, I might have to imagine quite a few other possibilities that I have buried and walked away from for years. Because you see, I want to always be able to go right out my door and walk or ride to the beach. And so the way that I have accommodated that vision is to say, well, I don't mind living in a teeny tiny condo in order to be able to do that. I put all those conditions on it and stopped having the conversation. Now I'm jumping around and I have all kinds of things prepared, but what's happening is what's meant to be shared in this moment. So I told you that I had this voice that told me, that's okay, I already know that. And I learned that that was the voice of my ego. And I'll tell you, that was the voice of my ego, not the capital E one that's plugged in with spirit. It's not trying to be like a lone soldier in separation, taking care of everyone and everything all by itself, entirely based on fear. If you studied A Course in Miracles, you know that ego requires fear for its whole system to operate, for its whole ecosystem to exist. It has to have something that poses a danger and a threat, something to protect against and someone to protect. But again, we don't have to say, well, you know, down with that, banish it, get rid of it. It's part of us that just got detached from wholeness. So the thing is really to recognize and reintegrate and re-educate and remember. So this voice that said, that's okay, I already know that, was actually protecting me from having the painful conversations. What would you really like in terms of health? What would you really, really, really like in terms of harmonious relationships? Because maybe some of them are unhealed differences. Maybe some of them are types of relationships with family or friends that I would like to have be better. Whatever they might be. What would you really like in terms of creative self-expression? I'm the daughter of a starving artist and a resentful mother who said, you messed up, you couldn't bring home the bacon and now I'm mad at you. So all of my artistic and creative stuff had to really work hard to get out, to be okay. And some of it obviously is, but there's more. There's more. And what about ease in the material world? One of the yachts that I worked on, we had a female first officer, and she said, I just love you, Marcia. You can make something from nothing. And that's when we were between charters and we were trying to use up all of this amazing food that we had bought for the guests with their money. And try not to buy too much for the crew that was extravagant. And I had this great capacity for making something from nothing. Well, that's okay in an emergency, but do you want to live that way? I have to tell you, this was my drastic and amazing discovery. I discovered that I had become so good at convincing myself that I didn't want things, that I forgot how to even talk about it. I got so good at convincing myself that certain things were not possible for me, that I completely forgot how to even entertain the idea of them. I got so good at believing that artists starve, that books which are started never get finished or published, that people who start books and write them and illustrate them and work on them for my entire lifetime die and they still don't ever get published. I believed so much. Oh my goodness, I believed this whole rat's nest of ideas about succeeding and prospering as being not possible. And so I pulled back and got really good at no longer dreaming. And I believed that voice that said, it's not safe to do that. I believed it so much I forgot that it wasn't me. Now, it may be very interesting to have someone standing up here with a microphone on, talking to you this morning, telling you that. But remember, we're all on a continuum. There are people who are beyond us in the linear sense, in the sense of expansion and growth, and those who are not, but we're all in our perfect and right place. And I really believe that we're in this together, and we're discovering this together. And every time I get more, I have more to give, and the same is true for every single one of us. So I thought I would share that. That, you know, they actually say in some of the conference calls that we have, that we get into these classes and we realize this point where we think, oh, this stuff doesn't work. Whose voice is that? Or we say, this is ridiculous. This is so far-fetched compared to real life. I'm not going to do it. But what if we have been conditioned to believe in less, to ask for less, to dream less, because we accepted this idea of limitation? We accepted this idea that there wasn't enough. So we had to learn how to make something from nothing. Now, I want to let you know that whether there is 1 0 or 2 zeros or 3 zeros or 4 zeros or 6 zeros or whatever in your annual income, we're all experiencing the same thing. Once again, because we're dealing with unlimitedness. Those of us who went to Disney last week for the conference, well, gosh, I guess it was the week before now already. We're looking at and reading about and hearing about people all the time, and these 2 classes as well, who have done the seeming impossible. Do you want to just stay comfortable and say, well, that was them, and I'm different. I'm unique. I have limitations. Do you want to do that? Really? So healing is revealing. Healing is revealing, and this is what I discovered, which is the good news. I discovered that those conversations that I was afraid to have, when I just sat down with a nice sharp pencil and a piece of paper, and I wrote down all of those things that I wanted, and then I wrote down all my reasons why not, then I looked at them and said, well, gosh, you know what? The truth is I don't believe half of that anymore. I had just protected myself from even looking, and it turns out it wasn't that hard. It turns out it was almost easy. It turns out there was only 1 or 2, not 9 or 10 festering, scary things. The fact of the matter is that if we're willing to just take a peek, I believe every one of us will discover we know so much more now than we did then. So if healing is revealing, might it not be to be willing to have those conversations and realize that mechanism that's protecting us because it doesn't want us to hurt or be scared or be disappointed again is just doing the best that it knows how with old information, with missing information. And the truth of the matter is that when we look, we actually do know a lot more than we did then. And it doesn't have to be painful and cathartic and dramatic, It doesn't have to be messy. It can even be matter of fact. That's what I discovered this week. Oh, I don't believe that anymore. So it wasn't the hard work that I thought it was going to be. And so it didn't require the avoidance that I thought was necessary, that some part of me did. It was actually easy. So there's this voice that had been working by itself. If you imagine whenever, in a Hollywood scenario, or unfortunately even in a current real life scenario, when someone takes over a plane or a ship or a country, they always take over the PA system, the communication networks, right? Well, and last week I was telling you that I learned that anxiety takes over the same network that intuition uses. And in order to get intuition, in order to get guidance, in order to get answers, you need to find a way to still the anxiety. and let that circuit be free for intuition to work. So I believe the same is true about allowing that voice of wisdom, that higher self, a chance to use our PA system, our communication system, by getting the ego to be willing to be right-sized. So another metaphor, and in becoming friends with the ego and reintegrating that, might be to imagine if you were your higher self, you now know that's who you truly are, and you were asleep to that, and you woke up to that, you might discover that this little part of you's been out here trying to take care of business on its own, and say, come sit with me. Come sit with me. I want to tell you a nice little story about how you came to be. You ever tell your children where they came from and the story of their birth and so on? So what if you say, I want to tell you, you and I were part of a really special team. And what we do is we work together to connect all the wonderful information, every answer we need, everything we need from our higher self, from on high, or whatever, however you want to refer to that. And we connect it with what's going on out there. And we work together, not to avoid danger, but to have fun discovering new ways to be. And you do have a very important job to do. I invite you to consider that you might take your ego in and tell it a story as if it's a child who just didn't know the bigger picture. Or bring it in as if it's somebody who works in your company who just didn't know, needed an HR meeting to have a better idea of how they could really fit. The point is to reintegrate. So healing is revealing. Healing is revealing that at the core, when we're not separate or believing that we are, when we're not fragmented or believing that we are, that we're already whole. So we're already healthy. We're already equipped with everything that is required for that health. We're already harmonious because we were made in the spirit of harmony. And there's no harmony to go get or find or hold captive, because that wouldn't work. We're already creative and expressive. We get ideas all the time. We get ideas all the time. Genevieve Berend in Your Invisible Power, which is a little book we're reading in Prosperity Plus 2, she says it's really important to act quickly on that inspiration. Do you have a little voice of caution that goes overboard, researching and mulling everything over to the point where the inspiration's gone, and maybe the opportunity too? Are you willing to take a risk and trust that voice and learn to become familiar with it and follow it quickly? And what about this living in the material world? You may have become a master of working with what you've got. You may believe that you're on a fixed income. You may believe that you're no longer doing anything but riding on your retirement, or a little bit more, or a little bit less. But what if you were willing to dare to have that conversation with infinity, with your higher self, and dream again? Would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to do that? Some of us may say, well, I don't know. I'm this age, and I don't have that opportunity anymore. Is that true? People go to university and run marathons and get degrees in their 90s. Is that true? I want to let you know a couple of other things that I found out before I close. One of them, because I do a lot of ceremonies, and this is just a trade trick. But I take a standard ceremony and I find and replace very often the name of the bride and groom with a new name of a new bride and groom. I'm doing a wedding in Vermont this summer for 2 women, so I just put their names in there. We'll work it out. But I thought of something. I thought, okay, so if you were to take that list of all the things that you'd like to do and all the reasons why not, and you did a find and replace, you'd start with select all. And then you'd identify every negative word and simply put that in the find, right? And And then put the replacement, just choose the opposite. Any word that is the opposite of that negative one. And put it in the replace. And then select, right? And do that for your whole document and see what you come up with. I have a feeling that you'll come up with a document that looks like what you do want. And then you can edit it and tweak it a little bit and take it with you. But I think what really holds us back is our fear of having the conversation. Because we have learned how to adjust our sights so we won't fall too far. We have learned to dream a little less so we won't be as disappointed. And so many more things just like that. And we look around and all of the other people who are asleep to what is possible for them have agreed to the same thing. Would you be willing to be one of those first people to wake up and say, wait a minute, I can be Walt Disney, I can be Steve Jobs, I can be, whomever, I can write that book. I can have one of those stories. We all can. Ernest Holmes says that we can't look at the thing that we want to heal and at the same time heal it. Because while we're looking at it, we're acknowledging that it exists. We just can't do that. We can't serve two masters. So at some point, we have to be willing to let go of what we have been looking at and how we have been looking at it and dare to have those conversations. I invite you to consider that you can, and even that you should, and that it won't be as scary as you might have thought, and it won't hurt nearly as much as you might have imagined all this time. And as a matter of fact, all this time while you've been living life and studying and asking those big questions, you've been gathering tools, you've been gathering skills, you've been gathering information. You have a support network of people who love you and believe in you. And you are made by and cradled in the arms of something that is infinitely knowing, loving, and perfect, and present, always. So if you were to go back and ask yourself again, what do I really want? I think you would find that it's not as scary. It might even be really inspiring. Let yourself ask those questions. Let yourself write or rewrite your vision. Let yourself dream. And let Spirit, Creator, the Absolute, and the Law take care of the hard part. It doesn't have to be